Recording now. Well, Sade was, yeah. How do I describe Sade? I got a funny story actually. So I was going to London in 2004. It was, yeah, London, England, to chat with some profs at Imperial College, University of London, and because I was thinking of doing graduate school there, and so I got on this flight, was all kind of amped up to get over there. I hadn't been to London before actually. That time I was coming from Vancouver, and I got on the plane and I sat down in this section that was filled with really funky people. And the guy I was sitting next to was just this very cool guy, and we started talking and talking. And I said, "Well, what do you do?" And he's like, "Oh, I'm a musician." I said, oh, "Okay." And for like what in a band or what? And he's like, "Oh, I'm a backup musician for Sade." So Sade's whole band was on this plane, and they were returning from having been on tour. So I sat next to this guy the whole time on the flight. He's an incredibly cool guy, and he gave me all the digs of where to go in London for jazz, like Ronnie Scott's jazz club being one, and various other places. So it was cool. It was a good start to that trip. I didn't end up going down that path with London, but good good start getting over to the UK. So tonight we're going to talk. We're going to continue what we've been looking at, which is examining or thinking about the the evolution of ecological thought, um, modern ecological thought, if you want to call it that, ever since the 18th, 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries, into the 20th century even. Um, and tonight we're going to look at basically kind of an extension of what we were talking about last time, but a new era that emerged in ecological thought around I would say, the early to mid 1800s, and particularly in the UK, but particularly where we're going to talk about is in the United States. So a lot of really interesting things happened in the States in ecology in the 1800s and into the 1900s. So the title of the lecture tonight is Sustainable Development Ecological Thought, but Romantic Ecology. That's why I started with Sade, because I thought I'd make it thematically appropriate, right? So where we left off, what we talked about last time, we were talking about reason and what I described as the rise of reason. And we witnessed the impact that reason had on ecological thinking, particularly in the UK and in Northern Europe. So there was a divergence in the two roads of ecological thinking. We had, as you recall, initially the Arcadian dream in Selborne, which was Gilbert White was really the main protagonist behind that line of thinking, or at least identified as it. But we also saw the emergence of reason in that era. So adding to this mix of Arcadian dream, which is kind of an element of like a romantic ecology in a way. It's a romanticism that's built into this awe and wonder of the whole workings of nature and humans' role in that. But we also saw the onset of reason, which was closely tied to economic development. But we also saw that there was a profound impact of Christianity on how we viewed nature and particularly how we viewed ecosystems. So in Christianity endorsed a view that man had dominion over nature, and this was in contrast to the pagan views, which were more in line with the Arcadian view of humanity having a more holistic relationship with ecology and being one of or a part of the ecosystem rather than having dominion over it. So what happened was reason tended to emerge as the dominant way of thinking, and there was a widespread kind of production mentality that emerged, and for a few different reasons. But one of the quotes I've used here that we talked about last time was the push to grow two blades of grass where one once was, right? So basically, get productivity out of land, and the economic and technological development that occurred at this time fueled a push to understand nature and maximize production. So this was the kind of the modus operandi at that time, which was um, to maximize production and maximize economic and industrial gains. And that therefore had an impact on how science was done. That encouraged people to think about things in those ways. Another dominant figure that we talked about last time emerged in this era, and that was Linnaeus. So we talked about Linnaeus's feats, which were numerous. He was a Swedish, ended up being a Swedish noble, but was not initially a Swedish noble. He was born to a country family outside of the city, and through his efforts and through his work and commitment and passion, essentially for ecology, um, was recognized by the if you want to call them bourgeoisie, if you want to call them the noble class, whatever you want to call them, and rose to those levels just due to his contribution to ecological science. He devoted his life to the study and understanding of nature. Particularly, what he was trying to do was bring order to the wild chaos. Now, as you recall last time, in this era, there was this kind of view that nature was this crazy wild thing, and that we either needed to bring order to it or separate ourselves from it and not be kind of seduced into it. So Christianity had opened the door to rational inquiry of nature, in part by creating the fact or creating the idea that humanity or man was separated from nature. I'll say humanity, humankind and this created objectivity in a way, right? So the scientific method is one of the fundamental principles of it is to minimize bias and focus on objective analysis of phenomena, right? So by the Christian church um, kind of implying or stating explicitly in some cases that humanity was not a part of nature. We had a dominion over it in extreme views, but we were not kind of allowed us allowed people to have an easier way of objectifying their views. So some even argue that the Christian church enabled science in this era. It really helped develop science because there is power in objectivity. So there exists between this duality between religion and science, which in some ways is mutually beneficial, but in some ways is other potentially contentious. And this is an ongoing debate, actually. Within this mix of perspectives emerged some remarkable thinking. Linnaeus held both an objective, systematic view of nature, he's known for that, but was unique in the sense that he was also deeply in awe of its wonders. So he was awe-stricken by nature, yet at the same time could objectively analyze it. And this is what he became famous for. So he created the Systema Naturae, which is a way of classifying nature, basically a taxonomic system, an economic approach to quantifying characteristics of different species, so in the number of pistils and so forth and so on. If you're interested in that, go look up his Systema Naturae. He wrote the essay The Economy of Nature, which was written in 1749, which was really his hallmark piece. And through that piece, he saw man and his ambitions as in line with other species, but with a special place of dignity and honor. So even Linnaeus recognized that man was not part of nature. There was a duality there, that we have a special place. This work led to the idea and the articulation of the discipline of ecology, so it really came from this. And at that time, what Linnaeus had done was he created a metaphor. We talked about this. Science had found its metaphor with the Linnaean view of nature, and that they painted nature as this grand, well-oiled machine, like a big system. And so some people took that to extremes, such as René Descartes, who was quoted here as saying, "Animals are no more than machines." So really, kind of like looking at nature as just a functional entity. Even Newton had some views on this. So the Age of Reason was ultimately utilitarian, in that man's dominion over nature was in place uh, for sustaining its well-being. So there was this very clear distinction between man and nature was at humanity's disposal, if you were to sum up the Age of Reason. And that's where we left off, right? So where do we go from there? Does history stand still and does thinking stand still? Well, no, it doesn't. It changes. It changes with with social change, with cultural change, with economic change, uh, and and as did ecology. As we start to fast forward through the late 1700s and into the 1800s, into the United States, we started to develop. There's social change was happening. There's a lot of different kind of social forces that were occurring in the United States in the early to mid 1800s, and ecology was a part of that. And ecology, in essence, can be considered to be a subversive subject. So, what is a subversive? How is it a subversive subject? It is in different ways. It has been used in some ways to subvert what we think science is, right? So this norm that science is objective analysis of unique or individual things and understanding how they work and why they are the way they are, whereas ecology um, has had the role in some cases to question that, right? To question reductionism, to question reductionism through promoting holism, to question objectivism or objective analysis by promoting a romantic view of ecosystems and nature. So there's a few different ways that ecology has and continues to subvert science as we know it. And even for those in the leadership course, looking at things such as post-normal science and even traditional knowledge, ecology plays a role in challenging norms of science. So it's been used also to oppose the expansionist values in the institutions of capitalism. It's been used to critique the bias of Western religion against nature, so from like a kind of a pagan standpoint. Um, but the connection between romanticism and ecology is more than just through lines of critique. It's actually, if you want to look at romanticism and ecology, it's not just through these critical lines of thinking. It's also through the very nature of what they are, if that makes sense. So characteristics of interconnectedness, holism, and relation were strong principles of the romantic perspective, but they were emerging principles in ecology as well. So ecology, I mean, what I'm saying here is almost ecology to some degree. One can define it as a romantic line of thinking, right? Because some of the elements that are fundamental to romanticism are as fundamental to ecology, like holism, like interconnectedness, and so forth. So that kind of paints the picture, creates the opportunity then for subversive thinking or subversive individuals even. So the 19th century romantic, um, this would be in the 1800s, is the work of Henry David Thoreau, who lived from 1817 to 1862, exemplifies the subversive principles that recoiled against development and were also fundamental to ecology. So if we want to look at how that connectedness or how that relationship between romanticism and ecology can be exemplified, you needn't look further than Henry David Thoreau. Like he basically is the perfect example of that. While Gilbert White as well, I would say they're both very good examples, but they're quite different in the way they went about doing their thing. But Thoreau is even as a subversive character, even I would say Thoreau is by far more the subversive individual. That's for sure. So Thoreau was the 19th century ecological romantic. That's what my statement is. I'm saying that that's what he was. You can debate it, or tell someone else that they might disagree, but I'm gonna stick to that because he carried the torch for the Arcadian ideal that was fostered by Gilbert White and Selborne. So he picked that up. So that was like 100 years before his time, and he kind of picked up that line of thinking. Literally picked up um, the literature from Gilbert White as well as from Linnaeus. So HDT, known as HDT as well by many. So he lived in a place called Concord, Massachusetts. Has anybody read any Henry David Thoreau? Maybe in an undergraduate environmental studies course or something like that? Anybody heard of Henry David Thoreau before? A long while ago. Yeah. Anybody else? First time? heard of him. Okay, Summerlee. Okay. No one else. All right. So if you haven't heard of Henry David Thoreau, which there's a number of you haven't, and I'm happy because I mean you have to know of Henry David Thoreau. Yeah, he's known for some quotes for sure, but I would recommend going to the library and getting Walden, that book. And I mean, it's not the it's not like reading a Tom Clancy novel or something like that. That's like keeping you on the edge of your seat. It's not like that. It's a it's a classic piece of literature in environmental thinking, right? Like it's just one of those classics. So, but not I'm. It's not going to like knock your socks off in terms of like entertainment and action, right? Walden, that's the book, Walden. So he lived in Concord, Massachusetts, and like Gilbert White, I mean that's where he lived and that's where he stayed. He didn't travel to the Amazon, he didn't go all over the place. He stayed there and lived there and observed there, like Gilbert White um, stayed um, stayed in his village. He didn't venture far. And during this time in the early to mid 1800s, it was a time of social upheaval in the United States. So Harriet Beecher Stowe published Uncle Tom's Cabin, which was a flashpoint in anti-slavery protests. So this is where slavery was still a very big issue, uh, and so there was a lot of kind of conflict and a lot of social action along certain themes, and this being one. American nationalism was promoted by George Sanders in the pages of the Democratic Review. So, amongst these pretty profound social dynamics and sway of socio-political forces, Henry David Thoreau was there in the midst of all this, but his main concern was observing nature. Like he didn't care about, barrels burning in the streets of Boston or what have you, or massive protests or marches against this or that, or anti-slavery or promoting American nationalism. He was um, he was bent on observing nature. That's what his main goal was. So he calls himself the inspector of snowstorms. That's one of his self-proclaimed monikers. So that kind of tells you about his character. He would watch snowstorms. He would watch seasonal transitions. He would watch how things behave on the lake, right? He was a deep observer and recorder of his local natural environment. And he documented this with incredible precision. So he noted how, one of these quotes that he has is he noted how the world's creation recapitulated before his eyes during the transition through spring. So he would watch the storm and then watch over, say, 3 or 4 months, say from March, April, May, June, the rebirth and the reorganization of nature right in front of him and document everything. He'd write down everything. The emergence of insects, earthworms, and the progress of vegetation as the sun came further north. So this was the start of observation, and I believe he had 2 years of observation that he lived on the pond on in Walden, life on the pond. So at 35, he began, 35 years old, with method and precision, his documentation of nature. And he had studied previously at Harvard, but as a naturalist and ecologist was largely self-educated through reading things such as Gilbert White's books or Linnaeus's books. So he quoted, this is another one of his quotes. He quoted Concord as being a wilderness of 1,000 strange species. And what he did was he renounced himself from society. Like he said, I don't want any a part of this. He's a very subversive guy. Like he did not like what was going on. And so he said, screw this noise. I'm going to go live on in a shack on a lake, pond, Walden Pond. And he lived there from 1845 to 1847. And the book, which I've mentioned, Walden, is a product of this time spent in nature. He was even put in jail for a night for refusing to pay taxes. He said, "I'm not paying these taxes because those taxes were." Currently at that point in time, the United States was in a war with Mexico. He did not want to support that, so he said, "I'm not going to pay these taxes. That's supporting a war I don't agree with." So they threw him in jail. Um, so he in his documentation, his routine, he would spend 4 hours a day. This was his vocation, was a recorder. His vocation was an inspector or investing. What do you call himself? Inspector of snowstorms, right? So that's his vocation. That was his chosen line of work. So every day for 4 hours, he would be a reporter of nature on nature. He would observe and record it. But there are some stark similarities between Gilbert White and Henry Thoreau. So part of which is due to the fact that Thoreau was very much influenced by Gilbert White. So this kind of the romantic thread between the 1700s and 1800s, we can start to tease that out here. So the thread of romanticism is strong between Thoreau and White. They're quite similar in their choices and their vocation. Both were, well, I mean, White was a preacher, like that's what his job was, but his vocation really was a naturalist, or in this case, Thoreau as well as a naturalist, an inspector of snowstorms, in his words. So they're quite similar in their choices and how they went about living their life and what they did, but there are some distinct differences. So White was revered and respected by the people of his town. So White was considered to be a statesperson of his village, of his town. He was a preacher, highly respected, people listened to him, etc., etc. Whereas Thoreau was in quite a different context, different time and different context. His distaste, he was in an era where there was a puritanical kind of feeling, or puritanical Puritan work ethic for one, amongst the society in which he lived. And this was a person who, so imagine if you're living in a small town, and then everybody was like, all the men were working from like 8 a.m. to 10 or to 8 p.m. to kind of develop the city and make a livelihood and take care of their family and so forth. And then you had Thoreau, who um, had a profound distaste for employment, and disliked incredibly the machinations of capitalism and was vocal about it. Um, so he ended up being an outcast. Like people, you know, people didn't, he couldn't, people couldn't relate to what he was, his vibe, and he couldn't relate to their vibe. So um, he also recoiled against this puritanical nature of the citizens of Selborne, or and Concord actually. That's wrong word. Concord, not Selborne. Selborne was Gilbert White. So he was like a subversive individual. There's no better way to describe him. He referred to religion in his town as rotten squash. So whereas on the other hand, White was the minister in the town, right? So you can obviously see there's some distinct similarities, but there's some pretty profound differences between their worldviews and how they went about doing what they did. So Thoreau was a very big fan of both White and Linnaeus, um, but he did have an issue with, or did recognize in both, the fixation with intermeshing religion and science. Because as you recall, both White and Linnaeus to a lesser extent, perhaps, um, well, White in a way was a little more kind of pagan, yet he was a minister, whereas Linnaeus was, quite religious and kind of in awe of God's creation around him, which he was organizing through his taxonomic structure. Whereas Thoreau, he felt that these views were no longer tenable. In the mid 1800s, things had evolved and things had changed. In light of the fact that science in the mid 19th century was diminishing the connection of religion and science. So at that point in time, that that kind of divide that we started to see, the tension between religion and science, was becoming less of a, because science was becoming starting to make up its mind about stuff, in the sense of like, okay, that's religion and this is what we're doing. We're doing science here, which is objective analysis. Um, he did remain a big fan of Linnaeus, with notes from the economy of nature literally shown in his fact book. So he had his recording of fact book, and he would have notes from the economy of nature indicating refer to it here, and so forth and so forth. He viewed nature as a messy mix of competing interests. So he always viewed it as this kind of big kind of mess of competing species, all wanting their biggest part of the world. And he rebelled against some of the ideas of the natural order that Linnaeus held and promoted. So Linnaeus was promoting a view of this kind of well organized, right? This well oiled machine that we could understand and you know um, and create a schematic for, right? In his case, it was his Systema Naturae. Whereas Thoreau, who technically was a pretty significant ecologist as well, like officially, saw it as a much more messy enterprise. So Thoreau struggled to bring together all the natural phenomenon into a single interrelated whole in the form of balance. Um, Similar to White in the sense that they're looking for the ideal, but he faced this problem in light of other issues as well, because, say, from a Linnaean standpoint, or even White, they didn't have quite the developmental pressure that was evident in the geographic area where Thoreau was. So he was faced with rampant development in his proximate geographic area, and he literally saw the history of and ongoing disturbances to land cover changes, and based on that, it was hard for him to kind of get a more holistic worldview when you're seeing like, okay, well, this has been deforested over here, yet it's recovering, and this is it, and this is it. We've got development here. So he really kind of spent a lot of time on looking at kind of the nature of disturbances, as well as documenting nature, but looking at the nature of disturbances. So he made his presentation entitled "The Succession of Forest Trees," and this was at Middlesex Agricultural Society's annual cattle show in Concord, which was noted as one of his most well-recognized and successful contributions to science, that presentation. Um, and his chief hope in doing that, in presenting to the public how succession works, was to help bring forests back, even to a limited degree, in light of the development pressures that were happening at that time in his region. So we can still consider Thoreau as an Arcadian, much like White, in the sense that they shared the belief that man must learn to accommodate himself to the natural order rather than seek to overwhelm it and transform it. Man must integrate himself or herself. I'll modernize this. This is a quote from Thoreau. So humankind must learn to accommodate themselves into the natural order rather than dominate it and overwhelm it. So this thread of thinking that has permeated social ecological thinking to this day. So even today, if we read social and ecological research and so forth, we see this kind of the push for integration of humanity into social and ecological systems rather than having us have a position of dominion over it. So what we can learn from Thoreau is that we may have to question the status quo, right? So he did not hesitate to question the status quo. And in fact, his life was one giant question of the status quo. He decided to do his, which was a lot more difficult thing to do then than well, I don't know if it's more difficult then than now, but I mean, it was, yeah, I think it would be more difficult then than now. Now it's like, okay, we'd accept that. Oh, they're just doing their own thing. Then it's like, they're crazy, and then we're all normal. Um, we can also accept the fact that our beliefs may not be in line with society around us. I think this is an important one. Um, we may believe even within our organizations, it's okay to and accept the fact that maybe the organizations in which we work or that we're part of um, are different. The values are different, right? I've been in that situation a lot of times, and I'm in that situation right now with a particular with a particular instance, I guess. And it's okay, like it's my beliefs are different, my code is different, and whether or not they're irreconcilable, such that we can continue to kind of collaborate and coexist is I think something that needs to be examined anyway. And lastly, be courageous and stubborn enough to pursue our beliefs. And I think for me, this is a really important one because this is kind of the nature of a lot of the work that I do through my company and individually. And I think it's important now as well for people as a whole, especially those that are concerned about some of the issues that we're confronted with on the environmental front. It's okay. I think if we look at history and we look at individuals like Thoreau and like White, like Linnaeus, but particularly at Thoreau, I think we can see that it's okay to be stubborn. It's okay to be courageous. It's okay to be irreverent and pursue beliefs that we believe in or ideas that we believe in. Um, because if we don't, then the world will go on its way out. Our input. I think the world needs our input for development. So the Arcadian ethic and sustainable development today. Hello, right back. All right. Sorry about that. My audio got out there for a second. So I was saying that Walden and the work of Henry David Thoreau is almost a precursor to the deep ecology literature and the deep ecology movement. So if you're not familiar with that, that would be the writings and thinkings of people like Alan Drankson or Arne Ness and others today, which really looks deeply at kind of an ecocentric worldview. So I think we can also learn a lot about being present if we look at how Thoreau lived his life and then looked at his work. So when you look at Walden, You'll notice the degree to which he focused on details in nature. It's profound. His immersion in nature was unique and valuable. And at this point in our history, we are being confronted with some very serious philosophical issues today. Um, for instance, do we allow global biodiversity to continue to be degraded by corporate interests and developmental interests? It's one of the biggest tragedies or biggest alarms is on in the world right now is the continual degradation of global ecosystems and biodiversity. So these are value-based questions. They're based on values, and what Thoreau has provided us is a very practical yet very useful ecocentric perspective that we can look to. So my advice or my conclusion from this would be that those that are in charge of national development planning in nation states should take some time to put Walden on their bedside table and have a read of that, even just for 5 minutes a night, and that might help them see that the nature around us is more than just useful natural resources getting that are ready for our exploitation. There we go. That is the lecture for this evening. Does anybody have any questions? I think we focus on consultation now so heavily. Oh yeah. Well, I mean, by consultation is good. Um, but who are we consulting? I mean, groupthink is a thing, right? Um, Thoreau wasn't consulting anybody. Like he was consulting nature. So I I don't know if I believe in consultation. I believe in stakeholder engagement, but I also believe in in having some independent view or individual views of things and not necessarily having that align with other people, right? Just because we do consultation doesn't mean we're going to get the right answer. And it also depends on how the consultation is done. That's another thing. Is it tokenism? Is it actual real discussion, real communication? With whom, in what language, etc., etc. Anybody else? All right. Okie dokie. I came in late, but what else? Okay. Don't know that. Sounds fitting that Virginia. She watched but tries. Never a dull moment. That story. All right. Well, thank you for coming out this evening. Did the production sound better? The sound, aside from the cutout, does it sound better? Way better. It's a professional setup here I've got, like literally in a sound room. So I can't promise this all the time, but when I can do it, which I can because it's close, it's at the public library. They have a whole audio production lab. I can use a full-fledged sound lab to do it. I think it's cool. Good. Well, thank you for coming out. I'm stopping recording now.